We have a fabulous group of 4 panelists with us today who are all looking at the solution of how do we change the food system and how can we use plants to replace animals. And then we have somebody who really is not in the business of replacing animals with plants. She actually sells meat. And so I'm delighted. She will, not be overwhelmed because she's so confident and so marvelous and well-spoken. But I'm going to introduce them singly and ask them all to speak. We're going to start with Adam Lowry of Ripple Foods because he's doing something similar to the 2 gentlemen to my left who are selling plant-based patties of meat that look and taste like meat. But he has gone into business to do something that isn't meat. So could you tell us what motivated you? Was it just because you knew you could never overcome the monolith, the aggressive, world-beating duo we have to my left?
That was actually part of it.
There was simply no point in going into that business, or what motivated you to start Ripple Foods?
That was actually part of it, but I'll give a little bit of context as background. So in the late 90s, I was a climate scientist and working on international climate science and policy. And that experience was frustrating for a couple of reasons. One, which is obvious, that it doesn't necessarily lead, good science doesn't necessarily lead to good policy. And the second was that as a green consumer at the time, I was really frustrated that all of the green products were really bad products. And so that led me to start my first business. Sorry?
All of the green products?
All of the green products, more environmentally friendly products, were bad products. They were ugly, didn't work well, they were too expensive.
Not to generalize.
To generalize, yes. And so I started a company called Method, it's a cleaning products company, and that company was largely successful because of the fact that we focused on the 96% of the population that isn't the dark greenies. I think it's pointless, really, to make green products for green people. I think we need to make more environmentally friendly, more nutritious products for everyone. Within the food space, that means leading with delicious first. And in my journey after helping to run Method for 16 years, I got really interested in the food space because it's much more personal. And frankly, the impacts and the opportunity to impact people's lives is much greater within that segment. So to fast forward to Ripple Foods, what's different about us is we focus at the protein level. So we've developed a way to get flavorless protein out of any plant source that contains protein. And so we can develop really delicious tasting foods that are plant-based from that. What we've launched today is a line of plant-based milks that are based on yellow peas. But the peas isn't the unique part about it. What's unique is it's really high in protein, low in sugar, and really delicious and creamy the way that milk should be, as opposed to what is on the market today, and everybody knows an almond milk or the like are very thin and watery, and it's not really the experience of milk. So we're really trying to bring dairy-free, as it should be, to a mass market audience. And frankly, that's an easier problem to solve than I think what these guys are working on. So that did have something to do with it.
So did you have any personal motivation for it? For example, the heart-tugging 2-year-old daughter who can't have dairy milk or nuts or soy?
There was a little bit of that. I mean, I think I'd be overplaying it to say that was a cause and effect, but my wife and I have 2 daughters that don't like milk. And
I was just taking a wild guess, by the way. I had no idea.
But I came at this business from an opportunity to create impact. I mean, the reason I started Method, the reason I worked at the Carnegie Institution as a climate scientist is I passionately want to create environmental and social benefit. I think business as the largest institution on the planet is the best way to do that, is the best way for me to do that, I should say. And that's what Method was about. Ripple Foods is about that very same thing. And there is a very personal connection with my daughters, of course, that now they love milk, and they think that Daddy created the company just for them. And that is
it's true,
partially true. I wouldn't say that's totally true, but.
And is it available now, I think, and how widely distributed is it?
Yeah, we're just launching. So we launched about a month ago in 6 Whole Foods regions in the west half of the country. We'll actually be nationwide at Whole Foods, Target, Sprouts, and a bunch of other places in about a month's time.
And how perishable is it? And I've never seen this product. I'm very eager to try it.
You'll be able to taste it at 4:15 in the Marble Garden.
Oh, you're
by the way.
anticipating me. Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
4:15,
yeah.
the marble tent. You all know. Okay,
Yeah.
you've given away the secret.
Yeah.
But is it sold in the refrigerator case? Is
It
your
is right now.
competition dairy?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We call ourselves dairy-free as it should be. I think that our first competition is going to be to beat the really substandard dairy alternative products on the market. I mean, dairy alternative products are nothing like dairy, and they're a huge sacrifice in nutrition and experience when you make that choice, either because you have to, or interestingly, most people now that make that choice aren't dietary restricted. They do it for broader health reasons. But I think over time, the opportunity is really to take on dairy. And our product relative to dairy on a water and on a carbon standpoint is 2 orders of magnitude better. So, I mean, it's not even close. And that's really where we can drive really, and it is relative to other non-dairy, but that's where we can drive really meaningful environmental change.
What about fat and calories and protein, since you were talking a lot about being able to isolate protein from peas, and you were telling me something I didn't know, that it was flavorless, because when I've talked with people who are trying to use peas and isolate various components of it, they want to wash out the flavor.
Yeah, it tastes terrible.
And it sounds like you don't need to wash out the flavor because you've already washed out everything that's not protein.
Yeah. So one of the core insights is that all protein is flavorless. All protein. The molecules are too big to hit your taste receptors, so it doesn't taste like anything. But plant-based foods that are generally trying to be a substitute for animal-based products generally don't taste very good. I mean, everybody knows a soy latte does not taste anything like a latte. And the reason for that is not protein. The protein's flavorless. So what we simply do, and this is something that's very different with Ripple Foods versus other people sort of using, peas are kind of popular right now, is that what we do is we separate the protein from all the other stuff, primarily carbohydrate, and make the milk only from the protein. And so it ends up with a flavorless base that incidentally makes it taste a lot more like dairy milk than another plant-based.
And how does protein and fat compare?
Yeah, so our product has the same protein as milk, which is 8 times the protein of almond milk, which almond milk is 70% of the dairy alternative category. By the way, coconut and cashew have none, rice has 1. So 8 times the protein of the dairy alternative, same as dairy milk. It's got half the sugar of dairy milk and about 20% less than the dairy alternative. But the big difference, so it's better on those regards. It's high in omega-3s, so the fats are functional. But the big thing is it just tastes great. It's the way that milk should be.
Well, what about fat percentage and calories?
Yeah, so the calories are in between dairy milk and almond milk. Almond milk is very low just because there's not very much stuff in almond milk. So our regular unsweetened variety has about 70 calories per serving. And
which is an 8-ounce serving?
8-ounce serving, yeah.
And are you in the refrigerator case? And so isn't that a very high barrier to entry to have to get into a dairy case?
Yeah, dairy case is really tough. We have the ability to make the product shelf stable and probably will in the future, but people shop in the dairy case, the refrigerated dairy case, so that's where you need to be. Fortunately, I've worked with a lot of these retailers before, and I've got a great team of people that have done the same as well, and that's really how we're planning to penetrate these and are penetrating these customers.
Great. Patrick Brown. By the way, Patrick Brown and Ethan Brown are not related to their knowledge, right? Or you might find out by the end of this panel. Patrick Brown, a molecular biologist at Stanford who abandoned his career, which was really going nowhere. I mean, you just had tenure, you were on track for lots of major international awards and probably won many I'm not thinking of now. What motivated you to go into this business? And something I'm going to be asking both Browns is, Adam just said something that caught my ear, which was peas seem to be popular now. Peas seem to be everything in the protein, alternative plant-based protein world. Why is that? So both of you say, why is it peas and not some other, not apples or millet or something like that, or buckwheat? But anyway, Patrick, tell us why you abandoned this leading nowhere career of yours at Stanford and decided to go into marketing burgers.
Sure. So, yeah, I had a great job at Stanford, and I've said, and it's true, it was the best job in the world. My job description was to invent and discover things, basically, and train great students. I had a sabbatical about 5 years ago, and what I set out to do was to pick the most important problem in the world that I could have an impact on. And I quickly settled on the problem of animals in the food system. And I think it's increasingly recognized that the use of animals as part of our food system is really the greatest threat to the health of the global environment today. And I won't go on through the whole litany of reasons why that's true. I could spend an entire hour on that, but I'll just give you a few sort of pieces of information about that. So in terms of greenhouse gases, land-based animal farming accounts for about 15% of global greenhouse gases, which is more than the United States, more than the entire Southern Hemisphere. It's substantially more than would be produced if you took every oil well in the Middle East and set it ablaze and left it burning forever. So it's a huge source of greenhouse gases. It's the biggest consumer and polluter of fresh water in the world. It uses more than a quarter of the world's fresh water supply right now. And according to the International Livestock Research Institute, which is an NGO that promotes livestock, it currently occupies 45% of every square inch of land on Earth that's not covered by ice or water. That's an area greater than North America, South America, Australia, and Europe combined, that's currently being impacted by animal farming. This is land that used to be habitat for supporting biodiversity and wildlife and so forth, that is doing, that's severely disrupted. And according to the World Wildlife Fund, which published a study that was very underpublicized in 2014, that found that over the past 40 years, the total number of wild animals on Earth, mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish, was reduced by a factor of 2. There's less than half as many wild animals across basically every phylum than there were 40 years ago. And the overwhelming driver of that, and you can look this up, this is their Living Planet Report 2014, is the consumption of animals for food. Habitat destruction by land-based animal farming, which is by far the biggest driver, followed by fishing, followed by hunting. So those are the reasons why I felt like, okay, this is a problem. And nobody was, I think, treating it as a solvable problem. As a result, all the environmental organizations that would kind of grudgingly acknowledge that this is a huge disaster hardly ever talked about in public, because what was the point? You're just going to bum people out because people are going to want their meat and milk, and you're never going to change that. And the particular problematic thing about it is the demand for these products is skyrocketing. It's projected to go up by 60% in the next 30 years. And so with already the horrible impact and all that increase in demand, there's, bad things will happen. So anyway, I decided that it was a solvable problem, and I was going to try to solve it. And that the way to solve it, the only way to solve it, was in the marketplace. Nobody will let you tell them what to eat. So forget about that. You're not going to regulate it. You're not going to do this by imposing your will on people. The solution is to produce more sustainably all the products that consumers currently get from animals. And since I was a biochemist and molecular biologist, I knew this was actually a doable thing. And so I set out to do it, founded Impossible Foods 5 years ago. And I won't go through that story, but I'll just say that the way we approached the problem was as a deep scientific problem. And what we wanted to understand as a scientific problem is what makes meat special? What makes any meat taste categorically different from anything you ever get from the plant world? And it turned out the answer is, there's lots of elements of that answer, but one aspect of it that I think is very intriguing and was surprising to me that had never been discovered is that meat contains very high levels of a molecule called heme, which is this red molecule that that makes your blood red. It's what carries oxygen in your blood.
What's in that vial?
Yeah. So this is actually the source of heme that we use in our burgers. It's a protein that's naturally found in the nitrogen-fixing organ of legumes called a root nodule, where it binds oxygen. And we produce this in yeast. And
no humans were harmed in the production of that liquid, right?
No humans were harmed. And it turns out that actually heme is found in every living organism, essentially. But in the things that we call meat, it's orders of magnitude more concentrated than in essentially any plant tissue or fungus or anything like that. And it turns out that heme is what gives meat in its raw state its bloody flavor. This tastes, if I were to put this, you were volunteering? If I were to put this on your tongue, it would taste,
wasn't prepped
it would
in
taste
advance.
like you had just bitten your tongue. It's also what is responsible for the magic that happens when you cook meat. When the simple nutrients in meat, like amino acids and vitamins, get turned into hundreds of volatile, fragrant compounds that are the unique smell of meat and the unique flavor of meat. So this is one of the things that came out of our research. And the point was, we spent 2.5 years just doing fundamental research on trying to understand meat and trying to understand where, from scalable, affordable, sustainable plant sources, we could find exactly the right proteins and nutrients that would enable us to recreate all the essential sensory and nutritional properties of meat. And then in the past 2 years, we've turned that into our first product, which is what we call the Impossible Burger, and which I strongly encourage everyone in this room to actually taste at 4 o'clock this afternoon in the tent over there.
But Patrick, have you brought
it.
enough for everyone in this room?
How many did we bring, Megan? 300. So
Okay.
get there early.
You think getting into your secretary, Carrie, is hard.
Yeah. Seriously.
There's plenty of milk, people. Plenty of milk.
So the tent is right up the way and right across from the main entrance to the meadows. You'll see the marble
It's
pavilion.
called the marble tent, yeah.
And you just look for the broken pieces of marble that are a very beautiful sculpture garden.
And that product is launching commercially next month in some selected restaurants, which we'll announce in July.
So thank you, Patrick. And one of the reasons there's been the intense media interest there has been in Impossible Foods is because you spent 5 years. You spent 5 very highly capitalized years with lots of venture capital money from Silicon Valley, and you were very secretive. So the idea that you're starting to come out in public, this is one of the first public appearances I've seen you do, so we're very grateful that you came. And it's also, you were saying, it's because I don't have a product to market yet, and you were also saying it's going to be so incredibly fabulous that you just have to wait for it. So we all get to taste it at 4:15.
Yeah, you guys have to decide for yourself. I'm not going to tell you, you know, I think it's fabulous. A lot of people think it's fabulous. It's going to be up to consumers to decide.
I have a trick question. When's the last time you had an actual hamburger?
Why is that a trick question? The last time I had an actual, well, I had an Impossible Burger just the other day.
No, a meat ground beef patty.
Well, oh, you mean made from a cow?
I do. I do.
That was probably about 40 years ago. Yeah.
I see.
So I'm not the taster. I'm not the person who's involved in sensory testing our burger. We have plenty of hardcore meat eaters who keep us honest on the flavor and texture. So don't think this is a burger designed by, you know, a scrawny vegan.
Or a mad molecular biologist out of Stanford.
Yeah.
Ethan Brown, you have been tested against the cruel buffeting of the actual marketplace for a number of years now in Beyond Meat. Can you tell us something about your motivations for creating Beyond Meat and the recent trajectory you've made in creating a burger?
Sure. So first of all, it's great to be here. I'm going to ask people to think a little bit differently about meat, and this distinction is the distinction that I founded the company on. So most people think about meat in terms of its origin. You know, they insist that meat comes from a chicken, cow, or pig. But I think about meat in terms of composition, and it's primarily protein, fat, and water. Amino acids, lipids, very small amount of carbohydrates, very small amount of minerals, and then a lot of water, right? If I can get all of those components from the plant kingdom, which I can, and I can assemble them in the exact same architecture of animal muscle or meat, then who's to say that's not meat? It's the same composition, it's the same architecture, it just didn't come from an animal. So the history of innovation is many times the identification of a bottleneck in the production process. And we do everything we can to get rid of that bottleneck. Well, in this case, the bottleneck is the animal. It's an enormously inefficient bioreactor that we put tons of plant matter through, tons of energy through, and we create meat from it. It's time to eliminate that bottleneck, and that's what my company is doing. And so for me, it's a policy story, but it's really a personal story. And so if I could spend a minute just to explain my motivation in personal terms.
Patrick did.
Okay. And it actually involves the Aspen Institute. When I was very young, my dad bought a farm, and he's a professor at McGill now, but at the time he was at the University of Maryland. And he hated the city, he grew up in the country. So we spent an enormous amount of time out there. It was supposed to be a hobby farm. But he turned it into a dairy operation, and we had 100 head of Holstein cattle. And so as a boy, I'd go out there with him, and we'd work with the cattle, and I began to understand agriculture and be able to understand animals. But I also had pets, right? I had a dog, for example. And as a young child, I couldn't understand the difference between the animals that we kept in our house and the animals we kept in the barn, and why one set was treated differently than another. And I'll get into sort of my own understanding of that now as an adult. But that motivated me to think about the basically life in a more expansive way than just humans and the rest of nature. And so I grew up and thought, I better go do something serious in my life, right? I'm big, I'm a big guy. I didn't want to be like Lenny and Mice and Men of just petting animals all day. And, so
inadvertently strangling them.
Yeah, I left that part out because I'm not as dark as Corby. So I went into the climate field, right? And I worked on hydrogen-powered fuel cells for like 10 years, right? And it's a great process, electrochemical process that you can drink the water coming out of the tailpipe of a fuel cell car. We spent $1 billion developing fuel cells for Daimler and for Ford. But at a conference a lot like this, about 10 years ago, I had all these smart colleagues from the best universities and great jobs, and again, a lot like the folks here. And we would wring our hands about climate change. And at the end of the day, we'd come back, and most of them would be having a steak dinner. I said, this doesn't make any sense. I knew intuitively about the amount of resources that were required to keep animals alive before slaughter. And said, I really have to do something. So I have a compassion-driven reason to do it. I have just a logical reason. I don't want to spend my life working on a problem that's only part of the solution. Now, I'll offer a different number than Pat in terms of climate change impact. In fact, the 15% that was referenced, if you just took the amount of carbon that comes from animals as they're respiring, as they're breathing, that's about 14% of total greenhouse gas emissions. And the UN doesn't capture that because they say, well, it's a carbon cycle. But the carbon cycle's been broken. There are not enough trees anymore to absorb that. And there's an unnatural number of animals on the Earth's surface. So the problem is bigger than any other problem we can approach. So from a policy perspective, I decided to get into that. But there really, if I could just take one more second, or maybe a little bit more, there's really 4 reasons, right? If you think about human health, you got heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. So 3 out of the top 10 reasons for the epidemics we have an association with meat consumption, World Health Organization, et cetera. Climate, we just talked about that number. It's about half of greenhouse gas emissions. Then you look at natural resources. 80% of our land here in the United States is devoted to feeding animals, right? And then lastly, you have this animal welfare question. And the animal welfare question I want to push a little bit on because we're usually not allowed to talk about that. That turns people off. And look, I have a very diverse board. I got hunters on my board. I have people that run major corporations that are involved in animal protein. But I believe we can have a dialogue about this. So what my exposure when I was a kid, what I was feeling, right, was the distinction basically between a worldview that's Francis Bacon, we're here to conquer nature, Descartes, nature is machines, animals are machines, and a couple hundred years later, what Charles Darwin discovered is that we didn't descend from heaven, we ascended from the mud. And as a result, we all share common central nervous systems, right? We share the same capability to feel pain. And so for me, my own personal journey was that if I wanted to be a compassionate person, I couldn't inflict pain on living beings that share the same ability to feel pain as I did. So I stopped eating meat. That was it. It was that simple.
At what age?
Well, it's difficult. I wasn't exactly coherent about it. Like in college, for example, I stopped eating meat, but I still wore a leather jacket. You know, it's things like, it took me a long time to sort of become a coherent person in this regard, but in my 20s. But anyway, so the reason this relates to the Aspen Institute is when I was 12, my dad sent me to work on the Aspen Institute for a week on the Eastern Shore. And so I worked with the Angus cattle. And I would put them in restraints and clip their ears, which doesn't hurt much. It's like putting an earring in. But I can remember being out there with the staff of the Aspen Institute, the folks who were running the farm. I was out in the field, and we were trying to get the bulls back in. And he said, you've got to treat these bulls, and he used a derogatory term for African Americans. He said, that's how you got to treat them because they don't understand you otherwise. And it was that sort of...
He was fired the next day.
He was not fired, actually. And so it was that type of exposure that I had that we have to somehow treat these animals differently in order to do what we keep doing, right? And I didn't want to live that type of life. So I said, I'm going to stop doing this. But anyway, so I then returned to the Aspen Institute at 17. And we lived there for about, when I was in college, that was where I came back to. And so I can tell you that you can have a beer on the Aspen Institute without being at one of these fancy parties. You can have a beer on the Institute with being underage, and because they used to leave the places open. So we had run of that place. It was a lot of fun.
Just like here when Secretary Kerry is coming.
Yeah, exactly. And then my last relationship with the Aspen Institute is this, that I've been invited to their fellowship program twice and rejected. So if they invite me again and I get accepted, I'm going to cry like LeBron. I'm going to hold up the trophy, right? So anyway.
Adam, have you had an involvement with Aspen?
Yeah, I'm a Cato fellow in the second class.
So would you like to tell Ethan what a grave, life-ruining mistake he made by turning down these once-in-a-lifetime offers?
I think you'll be there soon. Yeah. It's a great experience.
But you didn't talk about...
This was the Crown Fellowship.
Right.
Yeah. They're all part of the same Aspen Global Leadership Network, which is making the future. But you didn't talk about food. So you didn't talk about wanting to make things that taste good and how you've gone about trying to do that.
Yeah. So my challenge to my team is, and we're in Manhattan Beach, and we call our team the Manhattan Beach Project. And I wanted to think like that. I wanted to think about there's a international issue. It's climate. We have to get around this, so let's get the best scientists from the best universities, and let's put them together. Let's flood them with resources. Let's demand that they focus on meat, and let's become the people in the world that understand meat better than anybody else, and then let's rebuild it from plants. And I can tell you that 50 years from now, this may seem new today, it'll be absolutely commonplace. 4 years from now, my son, who's 12, he'll be able to drive, if he gets a license, to a major fast food chain and order one of our burgers, the Beyond Burger, without it being an event, with it being a normal thing. We launched our Beyond Burger in the meat section in Whole Foods in Boulder. We expected to have 3 weeks of inventory in hand. We sold out in an hour.
When?
About 3 weeks ago.
So it's very recent, this burger.
It's very recent, yeah. And so for me, the challenge about all this and the thing that makes it so interesting is that innovation, and this relates to a comment that a friend of mine said. So Don Thompson, who's a former CEO of McDonald's, is a good friend and on my board, great guy. And his wife, I was talking with his wife, and I was going on and on about our science and just the tremendous respect I have for the group that we have. And she stopped me and says, innovation is good for my iPhone, but it's not good for my mouth. And so our challenge is to create things from natural products. For me, I feel very strongly we're not going to use anything that's GMO. We're not going to use anything that the customer can't understand and isn't comfortable with. We're not going to put in things that put your health at risk. I have 2 kids. They are the biggest focus group that we have, right? So it's unlike what Elon Musk is doing. It's unlike what many others are doing where you can just dazzle people with technology. You can't do that in the food space. We want food that we can understand.
So why have we already heard from Adam about he's taken on the challenge of going to the fresh case, which is hard to get into. It's a very harder supply chain problem. You're in the cold chain. And both of you, Patrick, am I right in thinking that the Impossible Burger has to be chilled, or is it shelf stable?
No, it's, it's from a food safety standpoint, it's categorically different than a burger from a cow in the sense that a burger from a cow comes pre-inoculated with fecal bacteria, whereas ours doesn't. But it's very good growth medium. So
we're all looking forward to our burgers at lunch.
There was actually, one of the sponsors of this organization, the Consumers Union, published a study 6 months ago that found that 300 out of 300 samples of ground beef purchased at U.S. grocery stores had fecal bacteria in them, 100%. So I'm not just being inflammatory. Well, I am being inflammatory, but anyway. So we can make a product that's very food safe, but once it leaves our doors, it's very good growth medium. It's very, if anything lands on it, it'll grow. So we have to be cautious about.
So it does have to be refrigerated?
Yes, I mean it would be.
So are you aiming to get into the meat case or where?
We're launching in restaurants, and actually very, I would say, highly selected restaurants that have a stellar global reputation, not just for great food, but for great meat. Because I think the important message we want to send is this is uncompromisingly delicious as meat. And probably in a couple of years will start appearing in retail. But it turns out that in the US, every year 10 billion pounds of ground beef are consumed. 10 billion pounds. And about 5 billion pounds of that is consumed outside the home in restaurants. So it's going to take us quite a while to scale up to that point.
So are you going to be at a price point that's like, are you going to be in Peter Luger's, where we go and pay several $100s in cash because it's this great meat? Or are you going to be, next to Carl's Jr.? What is the price of
That's
your
a
burger?
really good point. So our design spec was we had to not only be uncompromisingly delicious, but we had to be competitive in price. At the time that we launch, we're going to be priced at roughly comparable to, say, organic ground beef. Let's say in the mid to high single-digit dollars per pound. But when we're at, in a couple of years at our full commercial scale, we fully expect to be able to sell at a price that's cheaper than mass market, supermarket ground beef. Because the fundamental economics are so much more favorable. You're using the plant materials that would be fed to animals directly to produce the food with a much higher efficiency. And so, that's a huge advantage, and we want to take advantage of that to just be competitive in the market.
So are you able to reveal where the restaurants are that we're going to be able to order this in?
Well, am I able to? I'm not going to name the restaurant, but because
they're really careful with their information.
No, because we're announcing it at the end of July. It's a restaurant that anyone in New York will know, and it's in New York City, and we're going to have a launch event in late July with the restaurateur chef who runs that, and it'll be an interesting event. And then we're going to be spreading into restaurants in San Francisco and LA soon thereafter. One of the restaurants, which can I mention the one in San Francisco?
Sure you can.
Yeah, I'm talking to my GC, not the one. So one of the restaurants is a restaurant run by a chef named Tracy Desjardins, who's I would say a world-renowned chef.
And been a consultant to you. She helped you evolve the flavor of the burger, no?
Yes, she's been sort of our culinary advisor for the past several months. She's awesome, and has a restaurant called Jardiniere, and that's her flagship in San Francisco, and is going to be running a little burger joint there starting in a little over a month.
Great.
Yeah.
Ethan, you are in the chilled case now, and isn't it the debut of a product of yours in the chilled case? Yeah. You were already frozen, right? So you already knew about the cold chain and getting it in. Yep. But what was it like to try to get into, a non-meat product into a case that had all meat?
Yeah, it was extremely difficult. And the ethos that I have within the company is that we're going to every year give the market the best thing we have, right? Because I believe that the interaction with the consumer is so important and allows you to learn so much. And so for a long time, I founded the company in 2009, and we've been working on this basic texture throughout that process. And the burger that we introduced into the meat section, it transitions from a raw state all the way through to a cooked state. Begins red and browns like meat would, et cetera. Gives the about 600 molecules that contribute to the taste and flavor of and aroma of meat. And so we've sought those out and then found an analogous components in plants and put them in the burger. So it gives you that experience of consuming a piece of cooked ground beef. The focus is 80-20. The issue has been, people just don't think like this. They don't think if it's not a chicken, cow, or pig, I can't put it in that case. But we've worked with particularly Whole Foods, has been very progressive on this point, to understand that, hey, this is a piece of meat. It can go in the meat section. And there was a guy named Tom Rich here in Colorado, who's the regional vice president, who said, I absolutely understand that. We're going to do that for you. And not only did he put it in the meat case, he opened up a restaurant inside his store called the Beyond Burger Bar. And so we can't keep the place stocked. We have to fly product out there on a regular basis, or at least we did it at first, do overnight shipments in trucks, et cetera, to keep it stocked. So my view is the consumer wants this. They want to continue to enjoy eating meat. And the entire focus of the company is not telling people not to eat meat. I think that's a massive mistake. We don't participate in Meatless Mondays. Meat is an enormously important part of our culture. We've been eating meat for about 2 million years, right? So it's not something we're going to stop doing. But we can enable people to continue to eat what they love, but just to eat meat that's been made from plants. And that's our mission, right? And I think that's a much stronger sell than trying to obligate people not to do what they love doing.
Thank you. We're about to get to Wendy, but I'll say that Adam had the way paved for him to get into the dairy case by soy and almond milks, which are both shelf stable and in the refrigerator case, right? Because I'm a very occasional customer. So, but you had that kind of big, basic challenge already met in the mentalities of the managers. Wendy, you didn't have to face that getting into the meat case because you actually make meat. So can you tell us about some of the challenges you face and whether, for example, I haven't asked you this, you had any personal reservations about eating meat or whether you've ever gone through the conversation with yourself about meat. But we'll also say the scale is vastly different. She's a small artisan producer right near here, and her restaurant, Meat and Cheese, has products so good that none of us can get in when we try to because it's so popular right here in the middle of Aspen.
Thank you. So first of all, is this an intervention? I keep looking around for my family in the audience.
You won't be lynched.
Yeah,
It's okay.
We're taking a vote. Should she
I was
go
keeping
out?
a close eye on the heme here. I thought maybe that was going to end up on me. But anyway, as the sole meat producer, I think they only chose me because Bill Koch was busy. But but as the sole meat producer up here, I think I'd like to talk more about food in general. And my approach to products is that I love food. I love to eat all kinds of food. I eat steak. I am also super excited about the future of food, which I think it's so great to have all these minds really working on how we're going to feed our planet when we are too big for our planet, and it's important stuff. We talked a little bit yesterday about the elitism of artisan foods, which, due to many different regulations. We work with the FDA for cheese. We're regulated by the USDA for meat. We're regulated by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. So there's a lot of factors that add to our cost, and then that cost is passed along to consumers, and not every consumer can afford to buy an artisan product where there is attention to the workforce, is there safety in the work environment, and beyond that, is there respect for the people who create the products? Do they have pride in what they're creating so that then that product is safer? In my opinion, food is something that is meant to be shared. It creates a communal experience. I hate that we have a TV in our restaurant because I feel like that takes away from things.
And yet you do.
And we do. We a little bit. We try to keep it off as much as possible. But for me, food is something that creates community, and knowing the people who produce your food is really amazing. But again, that's not something that everyone can do. So. Your question was?
You still like meat, and it never occurred to you to get out of that business. But also, why don't you talk a little about the price of your meat compared to others, and what is behind it, and your understanding of why some meat is very cheap as opposed to yours?
Yeah, so ethically, do I have any ethical reservations? I would say that's probably a part of the picture. I got into my business, the meat side of the business, as a cheesemaker. And people should know this, I'm not sure everyone does, but in order for an animal to produce milk, they have to have a baby. So in our case, we raise goats and they have to kid, and they can be bred every year, and they milk for about 10 months. So every year you're having a new herd of kids, and so we double. Most goats have 2 to 2.4 babies per goat. So you can imagine how quickly that escalates. So we decided that we thought the most ethical way to raise those animals was to raise them in an environment where they had access to the outdoors and they lived their life as goats. And then when it was time, we harvest those animals and use them for meat. And what we do is try to make a beautiful product with the animal and create something out of that, rather than sell the goats off to a sale barn and not know what their fate is and not know if they're treated humanely. And so that's sort of my battle with the ethics of it. The cost of that is high. We have very limited access to USDA slaughterhouses in our state. And for that reason, it's hard to get dates for slaughter. It's hard to get. It's not very cost effective. The meat that we raise is probably double what you would get imported from New Zealand. So if you can think about the math on that, like it's coming all the way from New Zealand here, and it's half of what it costs for us to make it. So, and then you think about the carbon footprint of all that. So there's a lot of
factors
expense.
that go into thinking about it.
Exactly.
Thanks. I'm about to invite questions, but you still haven't answered my pea question. Why peas?
Oh, I can answer that. So,
Ethan, then Adam.
So it has nothing to do with peas. So we introduced in 2013 a beef product that was made from peas. And so the reason that peas are ubiquitous now in the market is that they were available for starch, basically, and then protein came as a derivative product from that. Once you start to look at the plant kingdom as a source of protein for meat directly, there's just an enormous variety that you can pull from. Yeast, barley, camelina, lupin, mustard seed, tobacco leaves have great protein. Cotton, if you can figure out the pesticide issue, has great protein. So there's so many different sources. Peas just happen to be commercially available. And so our product is completely made from protein from peas. There's no soy, there's no gluten. And it, again, I want to help people try to understand this in the way that we do. We organize it in the composition of meat. So it has the architecture of meat. And again, we're not against meat. Meat is a fantastic culinary experience, right? And it's part of our heritage, our history, our culture.
Not that you would know for the past.
No, I test ground beef all the time. I just spit it out. But it's part of who we are. We wouldn't. So our brains, when we started eating meat, were 300 cubic centimeters. They're about 1,500 today, most of us. Our guts, right, were much bigger. They're smaller now because we had this like nutrient-dense source of food, like a Cliff Bar we found in Savannah, right? So it changed everything about us. We're not going to move away from meat. But we can move away from the protein that's in that meat and take that protein direct from the plant.
So it's commercially available, and is it stuff that did you test a lot of peas and say this is going to have the characteristics? And Patrick, I'm about to ask you the same question. Did you go out onto the marketplace, test what was commercially available, also Adam, and say, okay, this is my pea?
Well, I mean, I can speak for us. The reason we chose to start with peas, we're actually protein agnostic at Ripple Foods, so we can get clean, flavorless protein from any plant source.
What about the idea of using USDA cotton subsidies? So why aren't you just?
Well, we can go that direction, and that's actually what's really interesting about our business in the long term. We're using peas for exactly the same reason right now. They're commercially available and they're not soy. Those are the two reasons we use pea right now. But we can actually extract protein from where it gets really interesting from a sustainability standpoint, for example, is the byproducts of oilseed production. So flax oil or sunflower oil. We can take what's left over from that process, which is generally protein and kind of fibrous stuff, and we can extract protein from that.
Is it too expensive now? Is it impractical?
Actually, we're just working on the science of it. What's so exciting about that is, a pea protein isolate might be about $7 a kilogram. That stuff is going to be like 20 times lower cost because it's animal feed right now. And then you're playing a yield versus input cost sort of game. And that's what we're doing right now. and developing the protein sources from those things, which is great. But this is what I think is really exciting about the development of the future of protein as it relates to plant-based proteins, is that the world is, and we've only started to scratch the surface on the types of plants within the plant kingdom that we can get really high quality protein from. And it's just begun.
So while getting to scalability, I think the next class of Henry Crown Fellows at the Aspen Global Leadership Network can start something called Impractical Foods. Patrick, did you go looking for all the peas that you were able to buy, or did you decide you wanted to invent a pea? How did you get to pea?
We don't. We are proud of the fact that we don't use any peas in our product. So,
and instead?
So we've because we use purified proteins.
From which source?
We've done it from a bunch of different sources. Right now, the major sources are soy, potato, and wheat. We love soy and wheat, and potato protein is a protein that is isolated from what used to be the waste stream of potato starch production. So it turns out to be have some very unique, valuable properties for us, and the choices we made were based on very specific functional characteristics of those proteins and the economics. Because, again, it's critically important that we make a product that is as affordable as possible and cost competitive as possible. And, yeah.
So is there gluten in? Are there wheat proteins?
There's gluten. Wheat protein has gluten in it. Gluten is the most abundantly consumed protein in the human diet and has been for millennia. And there's about, I used to be a pediatrician way back in the day, so I took care of people with celiac disease, and it's a serious problem that affects less than 1% of the population in the US. So for those people, wheat gluten is a problem, and for everybody else, it's an incredibly valuable source of protein.
Great. We have probably 5,000 questions, and I already see 4 up. Let's get the mic right in this nucleus right here. And could you start and pass it to the woman on your right in very Aspen fashion? And could we have the mic start on this side with the woman with the glasses on her forehead, who will then pass it to the woman on her side?
Hi, thank you.
Here's what I'm going to do in our elimination round, unfortunately. I'm going to ask you two to ask your questions together, and we'll address them. Then you two to ask your questions together, and we'll address them.
Okay, thank you for your time. I'm Sonia. I am vegetarian and also have spent many years in CPG in the food space. So I think a lot of what many of you are doing on the panel are very much on trend. One of the trends, though, that I think is not in your favor is consumers' increasing desire for foods that are less processed. And I would love to hear your point of view on that, because my understanding...
Fine, I'll stop you there.
Yeah.
Sorry, and next question?
Yes. It seems that there's a lot of carbohydrate in what you use. Also, gluten, people are so sensitive to gluten, so many people, that you're using that, and why you're doing all pea and you're doing carbohydrates like potato. Why not legumes like black beans, red kidney beans? There's so much protein in beans, and they're so heart healthy.
Fine. Let's start with beans. Both gentlemen here, and maybe Adam.
Let me take that on. And I think this probably applies to all of us, but the plants that we isolate the proteins from are high in carbohydrates, but we're isolating the protein component, not the carbohydrates. So potatoes have a ton of starch. We take the component that's not starch and use that, which is actually, again, greatly reduces the environmental impact because we're taking a waste stream and turning it into something valuable. Addressing the processed food issue, I think, all the foods in the human diet are a combination of nature and human ingenuity. there's virtually nothing that you'll eat today that didn't involve humans taking specific components very deliberately, the most nutritious, the most delicious components, and combining them to produce a great food that's healthy and delicious. And when people talk about processed foods, I think what they're really talking about is the kind of black box processing that happens in big food companies, where things are done to produce this food that diminish its nutritive value and sometimes make it overtly unhealthy. And a lot of what goes into it is concealed, okay? And that engenders distrust. With my background, in medicine and biochemistry, I'm extremely deliberate. We have a full-time person whose sole job is making sure our product is nutritious and healthy as possible. Extremely deliberate in making sure that we put together the best combination of nutrients as well as optimizing deliciousness.
Great. I'm going to have to ask you to stop because we'll trust you. And your message is trust me on this. So, Ethan, and then
I'll answer very quick. But I also wanted to make sure you guys understand. We're going to have our burger as well. So go ahead and try that at 4:15 or whatever the time is. You can also get it at a restaurant. Well, what restaurant in town?
Yeah, Pluto's restaurant starting tomorrow. It's going to be on the menu.
Okay, well, this is the world elimination.
Okay. So real quick. So on that question. So real quick. So it's a tale. It's a tale of two processes, right? So that's really what food industry is, right? So in Aspen and Martha's Vineyard and Marin, you can probably get very food that chickens that have been raised in a way that you like, et cetera. But the vast majority of people eat food that's been processed, right? So it's a question of which process. Come to our facility in Missouri. Tell them Ethan said it was fine. You don't have to ask anybody. Come in. We'll give you a tour.
Just tell them Ethan said it was fine.
You cannot do that at Purdue. Right? You cannot do that where most of the world gets food. So we have an enormous commitment to transparency. I'll explain exactly how we make our products. We use heating, cooling, and pressure. If you've had pasta, you're going through a similar process. So it's really about which process do you want.
And what about beans? Beans.
Yeah, beans are great.
Why are you insulting beans, Adam?
Well, nothing wrong with beans. Actually, we're working on a lot of those alternative protein sources right now as in extracting protein from those things. So, I mean, it's absolutely a fabulous idea.
It's great.
Yeah, you can quinoa do it as well. And then on the process question, I would just say, you're absolutely right, and that's only going to continue. Our milk is way, way less processed than dairy milk. I mean, way less, and we can prove it.
No, you're not allowed, sorry. But you are allowed to come up, and I've got to cut you off. I have to, with the greatest apologies, say I've been getting the 0-minute sign for a while. But we're now at the assault the panelist phase of our session, in which they will stay here for hours on end, since so many of us would wish to speak with them. And at 4:15, we're going to have the Taste Off World Championship of the burger match, which is going to really make national history. And then, wonderful, we're going to have Wendy's cheese. How generous of the three of you. Thank you very much for the samples. Thank you all for coming.